Hello, I'm Christina Wyckoff. I am the historical archaeologist at the Oklahoma State Historic Preservation Office. Welcome to the first presentation in our 2023 speaker series, Hidden Oklahoma. In this five-part series, we've asked archaeologists and researchers working in the state to talk about important archaeological sites that they have investigated and to demonstrate how archaeology is critical to our understanding of our past. Today, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Leland Bement. Lee is a research archaeologist at the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey and an adjunct associate professor of anthropology at the University of Oklahoma. He specializes in Paleoindian studies, animal bone identification, hunter-gatherer adaptations, rock art, stone tool technologies, and paleoenvironmental reconstruction. His research projects are numerous and include the Cooper and Jake Bluff Bison kill sites. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you, Christina, and welcome everybody this afternoon. I generally give this sort of presentation standing up in front of everybody, but today I get to sit down and do it, so it's going to be more of an armchair view of some of our earliest sites that we have in Oklahoma, particularly in the northwest corner of the state. So I'm going to start us off with a little bit about the Cooper site, which is a Folsom age bison kill site up in Harper County. So let's start this by setting the stage with an environmental background bit. This graph that you can see on the very bottom of it, it has all sorts of squiggly lines, and the big dip kind of in the center is the last glacial maximum. In other words, our last ice age where it was very cold. And then everything started to warm up and it got temperatures that were very similar to today. And then all of a sudden, during what's known as the Younger Dryas, the bottom falls out and it gets very cold again. And that's where our story begins. So just before the bottom falls out of it, it's known as the Bowling Allarod, and conditions in northwest Oklahoma will look a lot like this. So basically, what a drought year looks like out there now. It's going to be hot and dry. There'll be some short grasses around, a lot of bare ground. And then with the Younger Dryas, everything gets a lot wetter, and then also cooler. And so it looks like a really good year for northwest Oklahoma. And it is during this Younger Dryas period that we see some very major changes in bison on the plains. But before we can get into the bison, our shift from the Bowling Allarod to the Younger Dryas is accompanied by the extinction of many large animals, including mammoths, mastodons, horse, giant ground sloths. You get the picture. Anything large, it leaves, except for bison. Bison stick around. This is one of my favorite graphs. It shows you the level of my artistic ability. So, when we lose all of the animals, particularly the mammoths, our earliest people in the area, the Clovis people, have to change from hunting mammoths to going after whatever animals are left. And that largest animal, like I mentioned before, is the bison. So they have to learn how to kill a bison. Now, our earliest reconstructions from the archaeological viewpoint would say that our Paleoindians, what we call these earliest hunters, pretty much lived in fairly small family groups that were roaming freely across the plains. and they would hunt small numbers of bison, generally ambushing them along watering holes. And they could do this during any season of the year. So that's kind of the background of where this story would start. And what I'm going to take you through is that our story now has changed fairly dramatically. So let's go to the Cooper site. You can see the star on this map places us up almost to the Oklahoma Panhandle. The site is located at the base of this bluff line, which is along the north edge of the North Canadian River. Out here, it's called the Beaver River. And so a lot of my work has been along this bluff line intersection with that floodplain, looking for old sites. And 30 years ago, actually 31 years ago, I was first taken to this site by Game Warden Dick James right after the Cooper Wildlife Management Area was picked up by the state of Oklahoma and was going to be turned into a game management area, one of our wildlife management areas, open to the public for hunting. And when this property first came to the wildlife department, the local ranchers took the game wardens out and other folks and showed them around the ranch, showed them where the deer were, where turkeys roosted, and along the way showed them where there were a bunch of bones sticking out of this bank. And they were told that these bones were probably horse bones or maybe cattle bones. And so nothing had been done with this area when it was in private hands. Well, after it became state property and I came on, Mr. James thought maybe I ought to come out and take a look at it. So I came out to this area and noticed all these bones sticking out and told him immediately that they were not horse bones or cattle bones. These were very large bison that were represented in this bone pile. And so we looked this place over and determined that, well, it looks like it's pretty much maybe a natural deposit of bones, but let's keep an eye on it because this area was going to be opened up for the spring turkey hunt. And if it did turn out to be a site with people involved with it, then we would have to worry about trying to protect it. So you can see the area where Mr. James is, all the little white dots are scatterings of bones that have eroded out of this bank. Well, after the spring turkey hunt, I went back out to the site, and indeed some hunters had also found the site or the bones sticking out and had pulled out a couple of the bones from the bank and left behind this tip of a fulsome point. So once it was determined that we had a fulsome association with these bones, then the archaeology kicked in to where we needed to figure out what the site really was and how to protect it or how to glean as much information from it as we possibly could. So this first object, is just the tip of a fulsome point. A fulsome point, a complete one, would look like this additional point. That also came from Cooper, one of the prettiest fulsome points ever to be found in an excavated site, I might add. The fulsome point is identified by the long, broad, flat flake or channel flake that runs from the base all the way to the tip. It's called a fluting flake, and this helps in hafting the point to the spear. And these points, as you can tell, date between 12,200 and 12,000 800 years ago. So with the discovery of the point, our first plan of attack was to try and cut back this bluff edge to see exactly where the bones were, where they were coming out of. And what we determined was our landform consisted of an ancient gully, here represented by this deep U-shaped sandy deposit bordered on the sides by the red sandstone. And the bone bed in this photograph is nicely hidden behind that tree branch that cuts across the upper part of the slide. And that is where the bone bed is. So our first indication was, well, just by cutting this face, that is limited access to the area, so at least the site will be protected for a while. So then we decided we could excavate along the one edge on the right and remove any bones sticking out. And again, that would remove it from view from anybody coming by to try to keep people from poking at it. And again, protect the site till we could figure out what to do with it. So doing our initial excavation, the first thing that we discovered was we couldn't just open up a small little area along the edge of the bone bed, because every time we uncovered a bone, it was articulated to the next bone and then the next bone. And before you knew it, we had the entire skeleton of a bison uncovered in front of us. Well, you don't want to excavate by just removing parts of a skeleton and then come back later to remove the rest of it, because in doing that, you lose a lot of information. You may never be able to match up which ones go with which. So it was determined that maybe we should try to figure out how far back the deposits go and see just how much it would take to remove this part of the site and what information it might contain. So that's where our excavations went. And that's how it got started. And the more work we did, the more bison bones were coming out, and they still were all articulated animals. They were articulated from the skull all the way down to the tips of the tails. So it was a very, very interesting sort of layout of these animals. And in and amongst the bones, as is circled here in red, were projectile points. Always fulsome points. That's nice. So it indicated that we were dealing with a fulsome bison kill. As we started to remove those bones from our initial opening, we noticed that in one area we dug down deeper just to make sure there wasn't anything else at the site. And as you can see here, we hit into another layer of bison bones. This indicated that we had two separate kill events in the same site, and they were separated by this culturally sterile deposits, meaning it didn't have any artifacts in it at all. So that means we had two different kill events in the same site. And here's a picture of that second lower kill event. And you can see again, they are completely articulated bison skeletons laid out. And it is a mess to excavate. It took a lot of patience and trying to figure out how to stand between bones and not stand on top of bones. And again, we're still finding more and more fulsome points for this, so that this lower kill episode also was a fulsome kill. And as we were removing bones from that kill, we noticed that directly under the edges of that bone deposit were articulated legs that were pointing down below, still going deeper into the site deposits. And they had what we could figure out were trample marks or hoof prints from animals being run across the top of them. So this indicated that there was yet another lower kill. And as we excavated, indeed, there was the lower kill deposit that also contained Folsom points. So the Cooper site has 3 different kill components stacked one on top of the other, all made by members of the Folsom culture. Now, as we were uncovering towards the end of the site, back up against the hill, one morning I was excavating in an area following out a leg bone, a nice articulated leg, and I noticed that directly under this leg bone was a skull. And as I cleaned off the skull and zoom in a little bit closer and zoom in closer, it had a red zigzag line painted on top of it. And in fact, there was more than just one red zigzag line painted on this skull. There was also a line that went across by the teeth. That line is hard to see in this slide. It's just to the right of the scale. And here's an artist's reconstruction of what that skull would have looked like with the line in the middle of the forehead and then 3 squiggly lines going towards the one horn. So here in Oklahoma, in a bone bed, we had a painted bison skull. This is the famous Cooper painted skull. It is one of the oldest painted objects with designs painted on it in North America, and coming in at around 10,500 years old makes it a very significant find at this site, and one that has been difficult for a lot of people to believe through the years, including when it was first discovered. We left the skull in place for a week to be able to give other archaeologists the opportunity to come out and see the find in place. And during that week, we had the added challenge of trying to protect this skull because we got over 5 inches of rain during the course of that week. That's how this skull got to be known as the lightning bolt skull. So we have the bison bones, but we also have quite a number of Folsom projectile points that came out of this site. And some of them are whole, some of them are broken. The broken ones are from impacting bones as they went in. And here you can see the top row is an example of some of the points from the upper kill, and you have the middle kill beneath that, and then implements from the lowest kill at the site. Notice how almost all of them have that fluting flake or that channel flake going up the middle of them. In addition to projectile points, we also found these large flake knives that were used to butcher the animals. And when your knife gets dull, you have to sharpen it. So in this slide, if you look close, you will see little orange flags, pieces of flagging tape scattered around. They mark the location of the resharpening flakes from where somebody stopped during the butchering process, sharpened their knife, and then continued on. So, what did we learn from the excavation of the Cooper site? First off, we learned that all 3 kills took place in an arroyo, which is a dead-end gully.
I just wanted to let you know that it looks like we may have frozen. I hope that we can correct that momentarily. Let's see. We are back.
Are we back now?
We are back. We lost you right at what we learned from the Cooper site slide.
Oh, well, then we didn't lose very much. What we learned is that these kills took place in a dead end canyon known as an arroyo or a gully that has a steep sidewalls and a steep dead end. So these animals were being herded into this arroyo and they would stop when they got to the back end where that steep wall kept them from coming out. The hunters would have been positioned on the rim of the arroyo and spearing the animals down beneath. So it would look like something like this, probably a little bit more alive animals. We also learned that by looking at their teeth and seeing which teeth were erupted and how much wear was on them, that all three kill events had taken place at the end of summer or early fall. And that was consistent through all three kills. And by looking at the growth patterns of the long bones, we knew that we were dealing with a herd that was composed of cows, predominantly cows and calves, and young bulls. We didn't have a single bull that was over the age of 3. So this fits in with our late summer, early fall season of kill of a cow-calf herd. The butchering that took place happened right there in the arroyo. The animals, when they were killed, would drop down onto their stomach, so in a prone position, and then the butchering would commence, leaving them on their stomachs and just cutting down the hide, moving the hide off, and then exposing the muscle down along the hump and down the back and along the tops of the ribs. In our looking at the bones, that is where cut marks were found, or along the tops of the ribs and those thoracic spines that hold up the hump. So this is the red, shows where those cut marks are, and that is the only muscle masses that were removed. And through our comparative butchering of a buffalo in this same way, we determined that they were able to get a little bit over 50% of the muscle off of each animal without ever getting into the gut pile, without ever having to roll the animals over. So they could just immediately get to that amount of meat in the closed confines of this arroyo. And we don't want to forget the painted skull. We learned that by analyzing this very small fragment of the paint that we were dealing with a mineral pigment that was ground and prepared long before there was the kill. They brought in materials from someplace else. The chemical signature or elemental signature of this paint is not like anything that we find out in the northwest part of the state. So it was brought in from somewhere else to paint. So out of our work, we figured out then that we were dealing with large arroyo style kills that were conducted in the late summer or early fall with a very specialized or gourmet butchering that left the skeletons articulated. There was no evidence of a camp nearby, meaning that the meat packages were taken off and taken somewhere else. And we had some aspect of ritual that took place within the kill area of this arroyo. This immediately led us to ask, well, if there's 3 kills in this one arroyo, and this part of the Beaver River has many arroyos. Are there other kills in the area? Well, the short answer is yes. We ended up walking along that bluff line and looking for other deposits of bison bones sticking out of the bank. And we came up with two more sites. And the first one I'll take you to is Jake Bluff. Jake Bluff was great. It's only, a few hundred meters away from Cooper. And we're going, look, we've got another site right here close. And we excavated down into it, opened up the bone bed, and found Clovis points. Well, Clovis is older than Folsom. I mean, if you have to be wrong, being wrong by finding Clovis instead of Folsom is not a bad way to go. But what is interesting is this Clovis kill took place only a couple hundred years before any of the Cooper kills. So Clovis was already figuring out how to make these arroyo-style kills in this part of Oklahoma. And interestingly enough, the Clovis kill also took place at the end of summer and was of a cow-calf herd. Now, another significant part of Jake Bluff is that above the Clovis kill, we have evidence that there was a Folsom component at the site as well. But the Folsom kill site, we couldn't find. It probably had already been washed away when the neighboring arroyo washed out. And we move a little further away, we get to the Badger Hole site. Badger Hole, again, is right at the base of this bluff line. Bones were sticking out. The site got its name because a badger had burrowed into it, and that's where some of the bones had come out that we found, hence the Badger Hole site. And as we excavated in it, we came up again with completely articulated skeletons, and there's a Folsom point in there somewhere. And so it's this Folsom age, just like the three kills at Cooper. And it also was a late summer kill of a cow-calf herd where the animals were herded into an arroyo trap. All of these sites then are cow-calf kills. They all took place at the same season of the year. And so we're going, all right, so what's getting there? Why are these bison all showing up at the same place on the landscape at the same season of the year? So we're going, well, maybe it has to do with bison migrating through the area. Now, normally with migration studies today, you put a radio collar on an animal and you follow it as it goes out across the landscape. Well, we didn't find a single radio collar in our excavations. That would have been handy. So we had to develop another technique to trace these animals across the landscape. And so we looked at back to our tooth development from these animals and found that the fourth premolar as well as the third molar all form at the same period of time over the course of a little more than a year after the animal was weaned from its mother. So it was eating the grasses, drinking the water on its own, and this tooth would form the enamel on it during this time period. And so by analyzing the enamel on the tooth, we could figure out by identifying trace elements within the enamel where that animal had gone across the plains to get those trace elements. So let's make this easy. One of the trace elements that we found was selenium. Where do we get selenium and selenium crystals? Up on the salt plains. We've all dug crystals up there. Well, these bison were going across there at some time and picking up selenium. It's also picking up lead. Where do we see lead? That's up northeast of Tulsa. So again, another point on the landscape. And so as we track this moving down that tooth enamel, that gives us where an animal was approximately every 2 months during that year. And then we can pinpoint where that animal was at that 2 month point throughout that 1 year course. And what we find out then is the enamel formation starts at the top of the tooth. That animal is over in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains and during the springtime. And then during the summer, they're moving to the east and coming out across the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma, coming across to where the Cooper site is, then continuing into the fall. They're going to be up near Ponca City. And then in the wintertime, they make it all the way into southwestern Missouri, where they're spending the winter. And then for the next spring, they hightail it all the way to the foothills for the next calving season. So in this fashion, then we've put together how these animals are migrating across the plains. When you put in where the Cooper site is, then guess what? It falls, these animals are crossing at the Cooper site at the end of summer, early fall. It matches the seasonality. So it starts to put together a pretty nice picture of people showing up, making these large scale, what we would term a large scale kill, because each one of these kills is probably of somewhere around 30 to 60 animals at a time. And in a large scale kill, it takes more than just a small family group to do that. So we end up with having to postulate that, well, maybe we're having more than one family group coming together to make these kills. Because after all, we know where the animals are going to be at certain seasons of the year, so we can predict the animal movements. All we have to do is get people to aggregate there at the same time and then conduct these kills. That's all. Well, is there any evidence for this? We turn to the projectile points, and what we see is there's a whole lot of different colors of stone being used to make these points. And each one of these different colors means that the material to make those points is coming from a different source area. And on the map on the right, you can see that the source areas include Niobrara jasper, which is a yellow point that comes from all the way up in northern Kansas. And then we get quartzites from out by Black Mesa. That's the gray point. And then we also end up with alabates. That's the banded whites and reds and yellow points. And then the furthest south would be down along the Edwards Plateau. These are the gray, the browns and blacks and dark gray projectile points are made out of that stone. So we can either try to figure out how the same Folsom group could move all the way from central Texas up to northern Kansas and circle around to get this stone material itself, or perhaps they could trade with groups coming from different areas. That works, but you have to bring people together to trade. Or the third thing is that it is the act of bringing them together that brought points made out of different materials to our site at the Cooper site or Badger Hole. And so there we're starting to see that not only do we have the prediction of where the animals are, where the gullies are, but then bringing together a large group of people. When we bring together a large group of people, you have to feed them. So a large bison kill where you can immediately strip off over half of the meat off of each individual animal, and you have 30 to 60 animals. you have a surplus of food. You can feed everybody over the course of probably a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and you don't have to worry about extended butchering or processing of these animals, because when you start bringing together large groups of people, it is the social aspect of bringing them together that takes over and it becomes important. So we see feasting and we see rituals going on. So when we combine what we found at Cooper with what we had originally started with, that other people had come up with, we start to see that there's a dichotomy in what's going on during our Paleoindian bison hunters on the plains. We have small kills, small numbers of animals, accompanied by complete butchering of those animals. The bones end up scattered around, the sites are scattered all around, and they're just ambushing one or two animals at the edge of a pond, and those hunts are conducted just by a single family, as opposed to a seasonally restrictive end of summer large aggregation of people targeting huge herds of animals migrating through an area that has these already has these eroded out arroyos that are made for hunting a large group of animals. And with that, communal style hunting, the aggregation of multiple family groups, then we start to see evidence then of ritual. So again, our painted skull. Our painted skull is a representation of the important ceremonialism that happens when people get together. So we've made now this model of fulsome hunting, known as the Cooper model, that we put together over the course. It has taken us almost 30 years to compile all this information from these 3 sites, from these 5 kill events, to come up with this reconstruction. And that's my presentation. I want to thank everybody that participated in these excavations and our funding sources of National Geographic and the Corson family, as well as the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, University of Oklahoma, Oklahoma State University, and other folks that participated. The Whitten Newman Foundation as well helped support this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. Really appreciate your presentation. Can you, I think we still have some time for questions if folks have questions. I see one asking if there are any other examples of painted bone from kill sites that you know of.
Painted bones, no, but not in North America. There's a couple of painted mammoth skulls over in the Old World that date to 20,000 years ago. We also, but in North America, we have another Folsom Age kill that has evidence of a ritual, and that is found down in the Texas Panhandle, where at the excavation of the Bison kill that is Folsom Age, they found bones stuck down into a post hole, and there were 5 or 6 bones just set on end coming out of this post hole, and then probably on top of that was placed a bison skull. And the excavators had already removed the skull before they found the parts that were buried underneath it. so they didn't have necessarily a good association, but it looks like that was some sort of a altar with a skull placed on top of it.
Very interesting. Can you answer, is the skull still on display at the museum?
Yes, it is. Yep. The fragment of the original skull that has that original zigzag line painted on it is on display.
And that would be at the Sam Noble, Oklahoma Museum of Natural History in Norman, correct?
Correct. That's where it is. They also have a pretty extensive display about the site excavations and some of the projectile points that came from the site.
Wonderful. Can you answer what minerals would bison have been seeking in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains? And what would have been in the southeastern Missouri area? I think largely the question is, why are people moving in this way?
The various minerals, when we did our study, we looked for 17 different elements. And so in some cases, like in the foothills, it is a suite of elements, not just one mineral, but in the foothills, they are the components from the decomposition of granite, which comes out of the Rocky Mountains. And so that's what identified that area. The region over in southwestern Missouri was again a continuation of not only concentration of lead, but also of tin. So by the time you put together all of these elements, it makes a pretty interesting map of the geology across the southern plains.
I'm getting questions in here. I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing them. Let's see. I have a question saying the complete Folsom Point, was the complete Folsom Point missing from the museum, and or was it found?
I never have heard that the point was ever missing. As far as I know, it's on permanent display at the museum.
Wonderful. And does the Clovis component at Jake's Bluff exhibit the same butchering pattern that was seen at Cooper and Badger Hole?
Now, the butchering pattern at Jake Bluff is one of fairly complete disarticulation, but they are leaving the bones piled per each individual. And so we also had a small portion of a butchering area outside of the gully at Jake Bluff where the legs of a number of animals had been cut off of the carcass and then handed up to somebody who then stripped the meat off of 4 or 5 legs and left the bones in a pile.
The next question asks, do large bison kills occur more recently than the Paleoindian period?
Absolutely. We have large bison kills um, in Oklahoma that are also found in these dead end gullies or arroyos. We have them during the late Paleoindian time at around 9,000 years ago. We also have them at 2,500 years ago during the late Archaic, and then also at about 1,800 years ago um, during the early woodland late Archaic transition.
If our attendees are interested in reading more about your work on these sites, could you refer them to, perfect, some additional reading material?
There might be this one book, would be a very good one. And then I've also written upwards of about 15 articles on these various sites. So a quick Google of either any of those site names We should bring up more reading than you ever wanted.
Perfect. Um, and I believe you already spoke about the location of the Cooper site, that we have a question about whether it's on private or public land, and how it was initially discovered. And that was at the beginning of the presentation. So I welcome our attendees to watch the recording at the end, and or which will be available on our website in the near future. I don't see any additional questions at this time. So I will refer everyone, as I said before, this is the first of a 5-part series. We're very excited to be hosting archaeologists like Dr. Bement, who are working in the state of Oklahoma, and for them to share information about archaeological sites with all of you, with our public. And you may register for any of those presentations, which will be upcoming on the Oklahoma State Historic Preservation Office's website, which is it can be found at okhistory.org under our events tab. And if you are registered for this presentation, you will receive an email from me inviting you to attend a future presentation. Thank you so much to everyone for attending, and thank you, Lee, for this presentation. This was wonderful.
You bet. It was a good time. Thanks.